How did you get to New York? What happened?
I landed in New York in November of 2003. I was working in London at the time in tech. I was back then it wasn't really the tech that we think of today. I wasn't like developing, apps to take over people's minds and attention spans. It was I was a web designer, as we called it in those days, and I got offered a job in New York as a transfer, and I was like 26. I'd been living in London for 8 years. I'd ended up in this tech job because I was just sort of a responsible eldest sibling that felt he had to go and get a proper job. But my entire passion from a kid was music, and the music of New York and the music genres that were born from New York had always held, enormous fascination for me. So I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to New York. It was also, as an Irish person, New York has always been a very romantic place because America was a place of sanctuary for Irish people for so long in a way that Britain wasn't because of the complicated relationship there. So I was like, I'm going, and got here, didn't know anybody, and decided that I was going to throw myself into the dance music scene that I'd read about, because, the history of dance music is one where, the genres of house and techno were born in Chicago and Detroit, respectively, but disco was largely born in New York. But the culture of dancing in clubs and the formation of club culture is really one that came out of New York. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so I was like, I'd read the books. I was fascinated by it. I really wanted to be a DJ. I was like, I'm going to throw myself into it. But when I went looking for it, I couldn't really find it. And then I realized that this is like 18 months after 9/11. So I kind of walked into like a funeral of sorts, like the mood in the city was still pretty depressed. And then also I learned that, Giuliani had systematically like decimated the dance music industry in New York because as part of his like quality of life initiatives and the whole broken window police policy at the time, they and also kind of tied up with the war on drugs, they had villainized clubs. And he had found an old racist law from the 20s called the Cabaret Law. That was a law that was invented back in the day to close down jazz clubs in Harlem, and because like white people were going uptown to dance in these jazz clubs and the establishment didn't like it and they wanted to shut them down. So they invented this license for dancing clubs, and then because those dancing clubs didn't have it, they closed them down. And that law was no longer enforced, rightly so, for many years. And then Giuliani like dusted it off and used it to shut down all these great clubs that existed in New York because, as a conservative Republican person, he was, caught up in the no tolerance idea for drug use, just saw these as bad places. And so a combination of those two things meant that I arrived sort of ironically from a city, which was London, which had a very healthy club culture, to the city that I thought was going to be even better, but it was nowhere near. But I was still enthralled with the idea of being in New York. It still held enough for me to stick around for a while. And I soon discovered that there was still a fledgling scene. There's always people, that go underground or like hang on to the remnants of it and keep it going, either in some of the smaller clubs that still survived or in non-traditional spaces like lofts and warehouses in Brooklyn. And that sort of presented an interesting experience in that I was accessing a sort of different version of the culture and learning about its real essence without the sort of mainstream participating in it. And met a lot of interesting people and artists who were just doing it for the art of it, and eventually started to get some gigs and would DJ around town. And then met my partner, Justin Carter, who was a DJ booker at a club in the meatpacking district called APT. And we were starting to have these conversations about dance parties and what was missing in the city, and what we what we felt was a good version of that culture, because it was also a time where some of the clubs that had stuck around had pivoted to like this bottle service, Wall Street kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of like, it was just kind of like tacky, It was just about making as much money as possible, right? Like play like, top 40 tunes, get a bunch of bankers in to pay, $500 for a bottle of vodka, some models, and just, make a bunch of money. There's nothing real artful about that, right? And so we're like, okay, well, we want to do something that's sort of rooted in these in the legacy and the history of dance music in New York. And the way to do that was to like go into Brooklyn and find empty space. And we bought a sound system, and we found some spaces, and we rented them, and we got some staff, and we went to the liquor store, and we bought a bunch of booze, and we threw illegal parties. And we would book some, better known DJs to sort of, have something to attract people in initially, kind of build an audience. And we'd start an email list, and, we just kind of built this like community. Yeah. And with taking a lot of risk, like these were illegal venues. I mean, we tried to be responsible in the essence of we look and see, like, is there enough exits here? Do these places have sprinklers, etc.? But there was nothing legal about the spaces from a building department perspective or state liquor authority perspective. And that wasn't because we were trying to be renegades or anything. Like, I was like, this was the only way of doing this culture that we cared about. And at the time I was on a green card, and I was like, man, if shit goes down, I'm out of here, right? But I also like was so excited by it. I was like, this is exactly what I want to do, right? And so to hell with it. Let's roll the dice. And people responded to it because, since the dawn of time, like since we were caveman, since the dawn of time, we've been getting together as a group of people and dancing like around the campfire. It's innate in who we are as human beings that we need to have these communal experiences to connect through many different mediums, but like dancing is very primal, and I loved being the DJ. I loved music, from a kid. Like one of my earliest memories is getting a cassette player and that being like the thing that I was just like obsessed with, buying cassettes and recording cassettes and recording songs off the radio, and just like those, like the New Order and Depeche Mode tapes that I had in my earliest, musical days have got like drum machine sounds and synthesizer sounds that are like deeply embedded in my brain. Like when I know when I make music today or I buy music today, like I go to those sounds, and so the idea of being somebody that was like educating himself on music, buying a lot of music, and kind of in an improvised fashion, playing that music in conversation with people on a dance floor in the moment, was just the most exciting thing in the world to me, and to be doing all the other work that orchestrates this experience in terms of the sound system and the space and stuff, just was like one big art project, and so we just kept doing it. Like the thing about Justin and I is that we really share this sense of ambition to make this our lives and continue to do this, and we've been doing it for a long time now. And so we just did it, and we just kept doing it, and we worked our way through many different weird and wonderful spaces in Brooklyn. And the party was called, or party is and was called Mr. Saturday Night, which was another sort of exercise in like trying to tweak the formula of the way dance music is often presented as being a little kind of like dark and druggy and perhaps like intimidating. And we try to turn that on its head by having this sort of whimsical name and this sort of like lighthearted branding, where it was like, no, this is for everybody, because there was a sort of value system that was also embedded into it, where dance music has got many different genres, and within that you would get slightly different philosophies as to what dancing together should be about. But the version that we sort of moved towards was one of, like I said before, the sort of communal experience, providing a sense of connection, and that sense of connection being a transformative experience for you as an individual. That means you may leave that party being a more empathetic or compassionate person, or you've just had a sense of joy because you've just felt unified or beyond your own individual headspace for a couple of hours on a dance floor, right? Like that was and remains the sort of philosophy. And so we branded and presented the parties as such. So they were branded in as sort of like, with a little bit of sense of humor, but often just like brighter colors. We called it Mr. Saturday Night. It's not some like, dystopian sort of like party name or whatever, it's like, it's fun. Right. And I think all those things started to really click, and a lot of more and more people would come, and we realized we had something sustainable. And then we started doing an outdoor version of it on a Sunday afternoon, and we called that Mr. Sunday for obvious reasons. And that became really big because daytime dancing outdoors in New York is like a super fun thing to do, and you don't have to stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning. And we started that on a backyard in Gowanus back in I think it was like 2008, 2007. And we did a bunch of years there, and then we went to Industry City. We did a few years there. And then we got to this place where we were like, still from a real estate perspective, we didn't know where we were going to be from like 1 month to the next, right? Because we were just going and renting these places like short term. And we're like, if we're going to do this properly, we need a space. Like we need our own space where we can plan long term and also take what we've done and stretch it in different directions. And so we started looking, and after a few years, we found this disused kitchen cabinet factory on the edge of Bushwick with a big blacktop that was the car park for the employees.
Wow.
And we were like, that can be the big outdoor space for Mr. Sunday. And the kitchen cabinet factory, which was huge, but was being subdivided, was like, we can take a part of this and turn it into our own indoor space. And so we took a 10-year lease, and that's when we built Nowadays. So I'll stop there because I've been rabbiting for a bit.
It's incredible.
So, yeah.
I would love if you can share any you mentioned your love for the history of dance music in this city. And I would love any information or any memories you have of what kind of music, what it was that was romantic about before you got here, the stories you had in your head of, and the knowledge you probably had about that scene, the history of New York music, New York nightclub environments.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so there's a really great book called Love Saves the Day. And it's by a British academic called Tim Lawrence. And he's sort of he is the definitive scholar on the history of New York dance music.
Wow.
And he's written, that's his first book. And his second book is, its names escape me, but it's a follow-up to that first book. It's a really excellent read. I'd recommend it to anybody. And that was one of the books that I'd read from afar. And it talked about the early versions of the disco in New York, which was like the late 60s, the first time that like somebody would play records for people to dance to, right? Which now is like, just seems very normal, but like there was a moment where that was kind of like, somebody plays records for you to dance. Like you dance to a live band. You don't dance, like records is what you listen to at home, right? So they sort of like took those two ideas together. And in particular, there's a party called The Loft that was the brainchild of a man called David Mancuso, who spent his life basically obsessed with creating the perfect dance party. And he became an audiophile and became obsessed with speaker design and speaker placement. He became obsessed with lighting. He became obsessed with music and records and all the conditions that went into creating this perfect experience. He used a lot of balloons. And he had a bunch of different loft spaces in Manhattan where he would throw these parties. And he was probably my first sort of obsession. He seemed such a like mystical character. But also the descriptions of his events, his parties, were so just otherworldly to me, right? Like he created a safe haven for a lot of marginalized people and a lot of gay people in New York in the 70s, when like going out for those people was probably just dangerous and fraught, right? But also because of that, the descriptions of his events were descriptions of like a level of diversity that like I grew up in Ireland. Like we're the whitest of the white. I mean, Ireland's way more diverse now than it was when I was growing up. But like, I don't think I saw a person of color until I went to London at the age of like 19.
Wow.
Right. And so there was this like idea from afar reading about this stuff that was like, this is just an other world that just is fascinating to me. And I'm entering it through music, which is the thing I feel I'm beginning to understand and I'm obsessed with. But this is like, it's opening up a world that just seems amazing. And so, yeah, so there's Mancuso and The Loft, and then there is like, there's a couple of different sort of points of sort of progression from that point. So like Mancuso kind of led to a very famous club called the Paradise Garage, which opened in just north of Houston in the sort of West Village area, that became like it's still often talked about as like the best club that was ever built, right? Like phenomenal sound system. But then also what was part of the legend of that club was this DJ called Larry Levan, who I mean, I never heard him play, but like he passed away, a long time ago. But he is revered as like just a magician, right?
What time period are we talking here?
So at this point, I think the Paradise Garage, we're talking about like mid 80s.
Okay.
The Loft is still going. The Loft still goes to David Mancuso passed away a few years ago, but there are people that still host and produce The Loft.
Wow. Where is that?
In the East Village.
Okay.
In the Ukrainian National Center.
Wow.
And it's still pretty awesome.
Wow.
But then, so Larry Levan and the Paradise Garage, where a lot of innovation was done on sound system culture to really create a bigger, fuller, more bass-centric sound system and experience. And that club became legendary. And that club then coexisted with Studio 54. And Studio 54 was the like celebrity uptown version of it was the other side of the coin to the Paradise Garage. And then as you get into the 90s, there were clubs like the Sound Factory, the Tunnel, like the Palladium. There's an old church on the west side. His name is escaping me, but you had the rise of all these different clubs that are all sort of innovating around sound. They're all accompanied with developments in dance music, with the arrival of house music from Chicago, with the arrival of techno from Detroit, and New York is synthesizing them and presenting them back in their best form, like globally at that time. And I'm reading about this, but I'm also just reading about New York. Like, to me, still one of the greatest things about New York is the diversity. I think about this at the dance floor nowadays. When it's at its best, you look out and you're like, there are just so many different types of people here at the same time, and it just is so colorful and vibrant and dynamic because of that. And I was getting that off these pages that I was reading, and also just like watching the movies and just, all the Scorsese movies and all just the Hollywood, idea of New York coming back at me. For a kid that's growing up in Northern Ireland, which is very socially conservative, economically deprived, because we're kind of in a war zone of sorts with the Troubles, and pre-internet, 4 TV channels on TV, just like this is the other side. This is what I got to get to, So yeah, that was was all flowing around in this young head as a great place to go and become myself.
Were you always from an early age musically inclined? Was that ran deep in your nature, and you always knew that was going to be a part of your future, or did you kind of develop that as you got into your late teens and 20s?
As a young kid, I really got into music. My mom was a sort of casual music fan, but she was a working class, or she's retired now, but she was a working class hairdresser who just enjoyed music. My dad was an architect. He was not a music fan, but he was very creative, and I think a lot of the sort of creativity and curiosity for the arts and culture in general I got from him. But my mom was the sort of music lover who was more social and more sort of leaned more into community. So I sort of those two dimensions of each of them, I think, are in me. But I also I didn't have a lot of role models, and I felt a deep sense of responsibility to be responsible, to get a proper job, etc. So I never a big part of my story is taking 20 years to come back to the music that I left behind when I decided I should go and study engineering at college, and I think that's a lot of people experience that
for sure.
They get, something clicks in them as a kid or as a teenager where they give up on the dream. Like my best friends and I would we'd be in his garage playing U2 covers together. And I'd be on bass, he'd be on guitar. We had another buddy on drums. And like, you know, we were Irish kids in our teenagers. There was a lot of U2. It's just,
I'm sure, yeah.
And he went on to be a very successful musician and songwriter because he decided he was going to stick with it. And something in me said, I shouldn't do that, you know? And, you know, I'm a dad now, I've got kids, and I think a lot about just, you know, whatever switch was turned off on me, I want to make sure it's not turned off on my kids, because it became a big part of me trying to come back to that for so many years, you know? And we all have our own journeys, you know, and it's fine. But you know, there was a belief that existed in my friend that I didn't have at that time. It took me a long time to rediscover, you know?
Yeah. The history of, you were mentioning about Giuliani in the, you know, post 9/11 era. I didn't know anything about that. That there seems, as you told it, there was an explicit effort to basically hamstring these music clubs from existence, to put them out. And you fill in any details that I'm missing, but I'm guessing most of those were Manhattan-based clubs that he was able to find, I think you said, this obscure law from the 20s.
Yeah.
And leverage that against them, where these clubs would need to get a license that many of them either couldn't afford or couldn't obtain in some way. Speak to that if you can, about that era where a lot of clubs are going away, are facing a lot of difficulty, which is right around, I think, when you got here.
Well, I think I got here just shortly thereafter.
Okay.
Like this was his strategy through the late 90s.
Okay.
I think, you know, the macro picture is that there was a lot of crime in the city, right? And I'm not an expert in the history, but I assume as a Republican mayor of New York City, he was probably voted in because people were tired of the crime, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of, I think that's the way New York sort of leans a little bit, you know, as it may lean this year, who knows? But so he came in on I'm going to clean the city up. And it was in an era where there was, like I said, there was still the war on drugs. And so amongst all his targets were the clubs. And so the law I mentioned was called the Cabaret Law. And he went in and he would say to these clubs, like, this law is now in the books. You don't have a cabaret license. We're gonna shut you down. And he shut a lot of the clubs down. And then a lot of small clubs or bars that still had people dancing had to put up signs that said no dancing. So you had clubs in the early 2000s in New York with no dancing signs. I remember seeing them myself. There's a bar on Atlantic Avenue, like a cocktail bar, that's got one of the old neon no dancing signs up as a, you know, sort of an ironic artifact of that time. But yeah, so you had the misuse of an archaic law by a politician to achieve an agenda. But fast forward to today, which, you know, I think is an interesting point, is that that law has now been repealed. There was a sustained campaign in the last 5 years to eradicate it, which was successful under the de Blasio regime. And I think what's really interesting in the 20 years that I've been here is we've gone from this like very antagonistic relationship between city government and nightlife, and by extension, city government and dance music and club culture, to one that's way, way friendlier. There's been a real change, and it's not totally harmonious, but you now have a broad acceptance by the mayor's office that nightlife is integral to the health of New York City, both culturally and economically. And one of the things de Blasio did was he introduced the Office of Nightlife, which is an office within the mayor's portfolio that exists purely to advocate for nightlife. And since opening the club, we've had, many conversations with those folks to help us on any number of matters. And it's made a real difference. I think you now have, like I talked about when I got here, there were no, the clubs were all gone. You now have a really strong, healthy ecosystem of clubs in New York that are all born from that moment where we were, Justin and I were doing our thing in the DIY fashion, but there were a number of other people that were out there taking risks and throwing parties and putting on events just for the need to do it, they have now all sort of matured and graduated to have their own legal clubs. So now on any given night in New York, you've got, a good half dozen really good clubs that are well run by people in it for the right reasons that you can go out to. And I tell my staff that we fought hard for this.
Yeah.
There's been a sea change in attitude, but also like a lot of people working really hard to get these clubs into existence. And I think it's taken for granted. But, that's me as like an older guy, just, wagging my finger and preaching to the youngsters to say, oh, this was hard fought. They're like, yeah, whatever, rolling their eyes. But it's true, and we should be grateful for it. But also another interesting point, I think, that's wrapped up, kind of comes back to Giuliani. Like Giuliani went after the clubs because at the time, American society's attitude toward drugs was like no tolerance, right? Like if you're buying it, possessing it, dealing it, partaking in it, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
Right? Like no tolerance, resulted in mass incarceration. It was the war on drugs. We're now at a point in this country where the war on drugs is kind of done, Like I know Trump is, going after the cartels, etc. But broadly speaking, there's acceptance that failed. And so from a law enforcement perspective, I see a massive back off, but also you see obviously the legalization of cannabis by the majority of states. You see like ketamine assisted therapy is legal in New York State. You see like just open conversations about the therapeutic potential of MDMA and psychedelics. Almost got FDA approval last year. Didn't, but it's demonstrative of some progress, a change, and then an interesting thing that happened soon after we opened the club is the Office of Nightlife came to us and said, "We've got a harm reduction package for you, right? Like we want to save lives. Like fentanyl's on the rise. Here's a harm reduction package that involves test strips, Narcan training for your staff, posters to put up on, to warn people in your bathrooms, etc." And we're like, this is awesome, but like, have you told the NYPD about this, right? Because you know what I mean? Like, they're the ones that'll be knocking on our door at 2:00 on a Saturday night, and we don't want to get in trouble for this. Philosophically, we're right there with you. And there was kind of like they know, as much as like everybody in the city government is all aligned on this stuff, like, but I sensed a real change, so we enact that harm reduction philosophy, and that's coming from a mayor, right? Which is in stark contrast to Giuliani. So now you've got club culture in New York that is broadly accepted, culturally accepted as an important economic presence and force, an employer, and you've got maybe a sea change is goes a little too far, but you've got a significant change on the attitude of drugs from that same government, and that just provides a completely different landscape for running a club in New York than it did if you were trying to do it when Giuliani was in power. And that's the contrast I draw every time, and just think of that journey, that arc. It's been a real interesting 20 years.
Is the history you just laid out there a big reason why there was a general move from clubs being in Manhattan out to Brooklyn? Is that linked to the Giuliani cabaret laws that were closing all the Manhattan clubs, and now so many of the big clubs are out in Brooklyn, or are those two not particularly related?
No, I don't think they're related. I think it was the scene. Giuliani essentially killed the scene, and the scene went to Brooklyn because that's where the empty spaces were.
Yeah.
And so, like myself, we went to Brooklyn to find the empty space. We knew we had a lot of audience in Lower Manhattan, but we also had audience in Williamsburg. Those were kind of the places. So we were always like, if we can stay in Williamsburg or adjacent to Williamsburg, we'll be okay because people will travel to us. And then over time, we could go a little further out as less of our audience were in Manhattan. But it was really about real estate. That's where you went to get the real estate. And then by virtue of the parties existing in Brooklyn for a period of time, it's where their kind of base was established and where their identity was. And then I think part of that, I think because of that, but other sort of cultural movements of like interesting restaurants and other interesting art sort of rooting itself in Brooklyn because Brooklyn was cheaper.
Yeah.
Brooklyn became the cultural hub of New York and took the mantle away from Lower Manhattan. And so opening clubs, it was like, well, the people that are going out are here less so than they are over there. And I think that's why all the clubs opened here. It's also where you could go and get a warehouse and open a space.
Yeah.
But I think that what I do find interesting is you've now got empty real estate in Manhattan. And you can't find any real estate in Brooklyn. So I'm waiting for the first club to go back the other way. You've also got empty office space that's not being used.
That's a great point.
And the price per square foot's about the same. I've heard some people talk about looking, and you've seen some Brooklyn restaurateurs open their first restaurants in Manhattan in the last few years. There was a piece I saw recently about that. Like Andrew Tarlow, who's like opened a ton of really great restaurants in Brooklyn over the years, was like one of the big guys, opened his first restaurant in like Chelsea like a couple months ago. So there might be an interesting kind of like spillover back the other way that might be happening in the next few years. We'll have to see. You
mentioned that there are something like a half dozen really well-run clubs on any weekend or any night in New York. What are those? What are the six or so?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll start with ourselves. Yeah. Nowadays in Ridgewood, we have parties every Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night we do a party that runs for 24 hours through to Sunday night. Now, I should say, that party is not designed for people to stay 24 hours. In fact, if they do, then that's a problem. It's a party that's designed for people to come at a time that is convenient for them.
Yeah.
Right? Like not everybody wants to stay up to 6 a.m. in the morning. Some people want to get up at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
and have breakfast and come dancing. Or they want to get up Sunday morning, do their thing and come dancing on Sunday afternoon. And then some people do want to go out on a Saturday night. So, and when you get those different types of people overlapping through a 24-hour period, it really adds a really interesting and fun dynamic. So we've been playing with that idea now for like a couple of years and tweaking it, and it can be tricky at times because we can't sell alcohol from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. But it's working, and it's really cool. And then in the summer, we do the Mr. Sunday party in the backyard from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. So the indoor party goes outside for those last 6 hours, and that's about to kick off in like a week and a half. There is Public Records down in Gowanus. One of the guys that started that is Francis Harris, who's a long-standing DJ and producer in the city. He was doing parties way back when we were doing parties. He's a very intentional and thoughtful guy. That's a really, it's a beautiful space. Really great sound system. They have a great vegan restaurant in there as well. So that's really popular. Then there is Good Room up in Greenpoint, which has been around for a while, actually. I think it used to be an old Polish dance club before it was taken over and turned into more of a house and techno place. So Josh Harkin runs that club, and Josh and I used to work at this club also in Greenpoint called Studio B way back in the day, which was a giant club that was opened at a time when there was not a giant audience and didn't last very long. But Josh, again, another DJ that like cut his teeth at the same time that I did, and he's doing good things up there. Then you've got Basement, which is in the basement of Knockdown Center in Maspeth in Queens, not too far from Nowadays. That's a beautiful old building that upstairs, the Knockdown Center is a big space where they do big parties, but also big concerts. And we've got a big outdoor space as well, which is a nice place to hang out. And then in the basement in the bottom is like very much this sort of like techno dungeon. It's intense, but it's like, what I love about it is it just provides a different variety of the experience. If you want to go out and like get super sweaty in a dark dungeon all night long, that's the spot for you. So, you know, I've been a few times. It's not for me every weekend, but it's an experience. So the other club that I'm going to speak to literally just closed, unfortunately. It's called Paragon, which is in Bushwick, which was the bigger club that John Barclay started and didn't work out, unfortunately. But John Barclay is the owner of Bossa Nova Social Club, which is a smaller little techno bar club, which is also on Myrtle Avenue in Bushwick, which is a really important club for just giving a platform for younger techno DJs that are coming up to have somewhere to play and sort of exercise their craft. So that's a good spot if you're looking for a bit more low key. And then going back up Ridgewood Way, there's another natural wine bar with a really great sound system called Mansions, which is a great like little club. If you're going out and you don't particularly want the like big club experience, you just want maybe something a bit more casual and not as expensive, that's a good spot to go to. And then lastly, you've got Elsewhere, which is a bigger space that is mostly a live music space, but they do a lot of parties as well. But those guys we've a long-standing history with because they used to run a space called Glasslands here in Williamsburg, which was a DIY space for many years. So I mentioned them because they're also guys that sort of graduated from that old DIY scene. So these are all clubs that are all essentially run by people that 10 years ago in New York were just finding their way and were like DJs, musicians, promoters, like that felt deeply about this culture and wanted to like do something long term with it. And I think that's the thread I see through all these clubs, and that's why I really appreciate it and respect them all. And there's competition, you know, because we're you know, there's only so many dancers and we're often trying to book the same DJs, but there's a lot of camaraderie out there as well, particularly during COVID when we were all talking regularly about how to stay open and keep our landlord, you know, at arm's length, etc. But it's a great ecosystem that exists that doesn't exist in too many cities in the world. I mean, a lot of cities like Berlin's got a good club system, a good club ecosystem. But, you know, I remember when I lived in London, there was a great club scene, but now London doesn't have a great club scene anymore because a lot of that demand has been displaced into the big festivals. And it's taken a lot of like sense of community out of dance music in the UK. So we're in a moment of time, I think, which is precious because it feels, to me, there's a palpable sense of community when you go out to a lot of these events. You can see a lot of people that you'll see on a regular basis, and you can get to know people and make friends. And I hope it sustains, but you know, we'll have to see.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about your club, and I'd love as much history as you'd like to share, but, you know, starting with when it opened, and you've talked a lot about values. I think you've used that word a few times. The thought that went in, the philosophy that went in for you of what you wanted to make. This is your baby. You know, when it was starting out and to this day, what were you hoping to make there? What are the values? What's the dream you wanted to realize with that venue?
Well, you know, the venue was born from the party, and the party, like I said before, was an expression of a version of dance music, which was one of like, come one, come all. This is an inclusive space for everybody, but when you come, like, step correct, like step to participate, step to be respectful, step to respect the kind of sanctity of the space, right? Which is a space of culture, a space of connection, a space that's important to people. And we're like, okay, well, we want to take this forward into a physical, permanent space. But the scale on which we wanted to do it was quite overwhelming, just financially. And so we stepped to the email list for the party that we had, and we just said, like, we're gonna sign a lease, and we're gonna open a space, but we need capital. If you want to be part of it, like, get in touch. And we did that over and over again for about 4 years, and eventually cobbled together the capital to build the space. But the process of doing that really solidified the sort of sense of community, because there was like woodworkers and metal workers that worked for free in exchange for a bit of the business. Wow. There was a contractor that worked entirely for cost to get a bit of the business. The sound system was funded through Kickstarter, a sort of separate crowdsourcing exercise. And so by the time it opened, there was a real sense that it was built by a community. And then I remember us having a number of conversations about, well, we opened the outdoor space in 2014, but we didn't get the indoor open until 2017 because of the need to raise money and just all the red tape of getting open. But I remember us having lots of conversations about, like, what should this club be, right? And we'd gone through this period in New York where a couple of clubs had opened, but New York had been the club culture in New York had been so decimated that I think it felt a sort of level of inferiority compared to Europe. And so there was a number of clubs that had opened up before us that felt like they were trying to be Berlin. Yeah. And I was like, this is whack. This is New York City, right? Like, this is the home of the Loft, the Paradise Garage, the Sound Factory, etc. Like, we need to be a New York club. Not only in terms of design and layout and sound system philosophy, but like the way we run the club. And so we really kind of decided there that it was going to be a club that's supposed to look like New York, right? And so we went out to the community of DJs in New York, and we looked at everybody that we were into, and we said, okay, well, these are the folks we're most excited about, and we invited them in as resident DJs. So then when we were programming, we would look at the calendar, and we would layer in the resident DJs as the building blocks of the programming. And we said, right, this is where we start, and only then do we add in the guest DJs or the big DJs from Europe or the big DJs from Detroit or whatever, right? But it's like the basic, the bedrock of the programming are the locals. And when we were hiring staff, we were going to the same community to hire staff. So a lot of those resident DJs, like, the person that we hired to run the door was their roommates, or the person we hired to run the bar was their buddy, And so you had this, like, nucleus of the club, which was bartenders, safer space, store staff, tech. They were all connected, right? And so that gave you this, like, the center of the club had this energy that was this community to begin with. So then when other people were coming into the club or other DJs were coming in, there was an energy that they were feeding off, which was rooted in the New York of today, and we've really just kind of rode that ever since, and it remains really the, like, just who we are. It's our DNA at this point, you know? And like I was saying to you, you know, before we started recording, like the flip side of that is that, you know, it's a genuine community. I think community is being co-opted in corporate world recently. Totally. You know, it's become this like meaningless word, but like for us, it feels genuine and real. And then with that comes responsibility to be, you know, a source of sort of leadership within that community. And then that community can make demands of you as that leader, which you have to process, you know, which can be difficult at times because it's a hard time to be in community, but it's who we are, you know, we have to live with that. And, you know, the other thing I would say, just in terms of like being a New York club on a sort of more technical, but, you know, fun matter is that a lot of the clubs in Europe have their sound systems set up where all of the sound comes from one side of the room. And one of the things that New York kind of invented was like having these four corners of speaker stacks. So you have this fully, you know, engrossing sound experience, and you also have these like speakers that are flowing from the ceiling. And so we worked with a sound engineer who cut his teeth in all of the pre-Giuliani clubs.
Whoa!
To bring that philosophy and that sound system design in. So a big part of the conversation was also like a connection to the heritage. So let's go back to where that heritage started, you know, with sound system culture, bring that guy in to design the sound. And similarly with our bookings, you know, we continue to book like some of the older DJs who were there and did it, you know, in the 90s, who are just like still amazing to this day, and try and like infuse that multi-generational dimension to the club so that is reflected in the DJ booth, but also then it's reflected on the floor. You will see like older heads coming through, you know, guys in their 60s and 70s that are like still got the moves and still want to come out and dance because, you know, like a lot of cultures, it's a culture that's getting older, you know, and it's like a lot of cultures originally are youth cultures, but then they mature and then they have to decide if they're going to mature and stand on their own 2 feet. Like jazz is not a youth culture anymore, you know? Yeah. Rock and roll is not a youth culture anymore, but it was at one point. But it can change and it can still be a valid form of culture, you know? And when it gets that maturity point, then it needs, in my view, it needs to like uphold its past, but also be fresh for younger people coming through. And then it's a source of community on an ongoing basis in a society. So we're trying to place ourselves in, you know, into that place in dance music history in New York and be a place to, you know, maintain it.
Yeah. I thought you gave a very good description of the community connection in the sense that a lot of people there have some form of skin in the game, some direct connection to people that are performing there, have built the place. Sounds like are part owners or were part owners. Is it also the repetition of it's the same kind of people coming back week after week where there's a familiarity of the patrons, the people who are there? I'd love for you to speak to that. And then also as somebody myself, I really want to go. I've never been. I'd love for you to give a description, and I'm sure every night is different, but for someone walking into this place for the first time, what can they expect in terms of the environment, the people, the experience?
Well, on the question of regulars, yes, there's a lot of regulars come through. So the Mr. Sunday party, which happens outdoors from the second week of May to the end of October, which I still DJ, and
cool.
It's going to start not this weekend but next weekend. I'm constantly seeing familiar faces from the DJ booth, which is one of the best parts of the experience for me, is seeing the same faces. Like I feel like I have a musical relationship with these people. Like I know I know what moves them, and it helps me inform what I'm playing, and their energy feeds the rest of the crowd, and it's really part of something that you're building, together. And the consistency of those faces adds so much to the vibe. The same happens indoors as well. Different faces because it's a nighttime thing and it's darker, although, in the winter when we open during the day on Sunday, you get some of the Mr. Sunday crowd coming through, but there's different people sort of come for different things. But every week the staff sit down and we talk about the weekend before, and the constant conversation about a lot of the same people, which is great. For people that haven't been there before, I mean, I guess I'll talk about the indoor experience, and I'll talk about Mr. Sunday. There's a lot of similarity, but some differences. If you were to come to nowadays on a regular Saturday night, the first thing you'll experience, which is unique, I think, for nowadays, is that before you're admitted, you're given a speech. So it's a little bit like, maybe you're at Disneyland and you're given a little video about what the whole experience is going to be about and the things that are expected of you before you enter. We do this in person. And we basically explain that, this is a club that's important to a lot of people, and we expect you to participate if you're on the dance floor, and you're not allowed to use your phone on the dance floor because it just takes people out of the moment and distracts other people. If you're going to have a big, giant group conversation, there's a ton of space to do that by the bar or on all the seating that we've got. But we ask that you don't do it on the dance floor because it's a place where people are really feeding off dancing energy, where we're all together in the moment. Then there's the no harassment. Consent is mandatory. And then there's the little harm reduction speech. If you need testing strips, we've got them. You can ask for them at the bar, or I've got some here. We explain that we have staff called Safer Space Monitors who wear armbands that light up. And so if you feel you need to access somebody because you're concerned about anything, find one of those people and you'll be taken care of. And it's generally a very positive interaction where people are like, oh, I feel like I'm going to be looked after here. I feel like I'm excited to go in here because these guys are serious about creating an experience that I've come for. And we're kind of sharpening etiquette, around behavior, which, on a Saturday night in New York is no bad thing because it's Saturday night in New York and there's, a lot of energies flying around. So it helps us kind of manage the culture and manage the behaviors. And then you walk in, you go up some steps, and directly in front of you is the bar. At this point, it's pretty dark, but sufficient lighting to navigate. And then round to your right, there's a little kind of archway of hanging plants, and through there you would see various flashing lights or glowing lights, depending on what the lighting operator is doing at that time. And you would sense, you would hear the music, but in a way that is, hopefully, if it's being run properly, which, it always is powerful, but not overwhelming. It doesn't hurt your ears. You can still have a conversation, but you're still feeling a sense of bass in your legs, in your chest, and you would walk onto a dance floor that is electric, that is you should really feel like, oh, I've just stepped into a room where everybody is in the moment, sharing an experience, and everybody's locked into that same experience, and it's a real sense of connection where you feel you are becoming part of something that's bigger than yourself. And a good DJ will do that if he or she is given the right room with the right tools, that's an environment that's run in the right way. And so if all those factors come together, that's the experience that you will get, and you will feel like I've never been in a room that sounded so good, that is felt so good, and I want to stay here for a long time. And I've been in there, obviously spent a lot of hours in there, but when I've been in there and it's at its best, it's like time sort of like stands still. I'm like, what? Really? It's been like 3 hours. I remember being in there on New Year's Day. Like one of my favorite DJs in the world is this guy, Theo Parrish from Detroit, and he's one of our residents. It's kind of one of our big achievements is we convinced him to be a resident, and it's because he loves playing at the club. And I played New Year's Eve early morning, and he played after me, and I remember just being like, it's like 6 o'clock, and like an hour ago it was like 10 o'clock. Just at times you're not on your phone. You're seeing so many familiar faces. You're chatting, you're dancing, and you're just in this like womb, this like cocoon of sound and vibe that is such a release from the rest of our lives, and that's really that's what we aspire to create on a regular basis. That is the manifestation of all the ingredients that we try and put together. So that's indoor. Outdoor is very much the same, apart from the fact that it's outdoor. The dance floor is twice as big, but it's surrounded by. It's kind of like a little park that we've built. It's got a bunch of trees, a lot of tree coverage, picnic tables, hammocks, food truck, big bar. It's all ages. So my kids come and hang out until like 6, and then it gets a little darker and a little busier with people, and it's a good time for them to go home and go to bed. But it is all ages. Again, that's the sort of stretch in the multi-generational thing in the other direction. So you will get more families come through. Like indoors is over 21. So you get more families coming through, but you also get the indoor crowd that are spilling out into the outdoor parties. So they've got that kind of loose energy. They've been in the time warp for a few hours, and they're just like coming into the sun. The kids are coming in, and then it sort of resets and becomes this thing of like dancing under the sun. There's lots of shade, and we have these like misters that mists the dance floor with a bit of moisture every so often, particularly in like, middle of August.
For sure, yeah.
But it's the same sound system. It's just twice as big, built by the same guy with the same philosophy. Sounds great. And we have a lighting rig that sort of kicks in when the lights goes, the sun goes down. Musically, it tends to be a little more upbeat, because it's outdoors, it's family oriented, it's daytime. We myself and Justin play pretty broad musically, but we're aware of the need to keep it, on a certain vibe for like a daytime party.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, that party tends to like really, really like energy wise, it stops right at 9 o'clock. And so it tends to like go to its peak and then stop straight away. Whereas the indoor tends to like reach its peak and then slowly come down. We've always done that with Mr. Sunday, because it's 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. 80% of you people got to be up for work in the morning.
Yeah.
Like, this is the time to go, and we're going to leave you on a real high, and we're all going to be thankful for it. Come next Sunday, so you'll come back. So it's got a slightly different design around it in that respect, but we've learned that works the best way over 15 years of doing it. So yeah, that's pretty much the nowadays experience in a nutshell.
You said earlier something that I think is worth talking about, which is that dance, just as human, it's as old as we are. It's as old as humanity.
Yeah.
We've always done this. And I was thinking, as you were describing, your facility, that I would bet for a lot of people, it's something akin to their church. They go there for basically a religious or a spiritual experience, whether that's connected to something in an organized religious manner or not. It really it's a sacred space essentially for them. I don't know. I'd just love for you to talk about that idea a little bit. You said earlier, I had no clue that the de Blasio administration had made a department to work with the nightlife community. And I think you mentioned that it was their belief that a healthy city has healthy venues like this for people to have these outlets. You just said this, that it's so different from normal life, and people need that sort of transition oftentimes to give themselves a break, or just to have like an awesome experience. Anything you want to comment on that, I'd love to hear, because you've built basically like a music cathedral, essentially, that it sounds like a lot of recurring people rely on as a big part of their life. I don't know if you've thought a lot about this idea. I bet you probably have, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, there's a lot of conversation today about people feeling more disconnected,
for sure,
from each other than they've ever done in their lifetime. And the epidemic of loneliness is something that's talked about, at the most senior government levels. And, you've got, I forget the name here. Is it Bowling Alone is the book?
Robert Putnam.
A great book that really lays this all out. And then you've got the work of Jonathan Haidt, who's leaning into what's missing as it relates to children and their development, but also society writ large, in terms of we're too comfortable alone, and so we are spending more time alone, but we don't realize that we're giving up on another essential need, which is to be connected. Probably the most important need, arguably. And so I see what we do in that context, and I see it as important because of that. We provide a space for people to connect through the medium of music, and in particular dancing. And on a basic level, it's just that. On a more evolved level, I think there's transformation that can happen through that practice, and church is often evoked in dance music. I mean, there's a whole subgenre of house music that's just gospel house, right? Which, I've got my little sliver of records at home in my record shelf of my gospel house records. It's that's nothing new. That's been around for a long time. I mean, disco evolved from gospel. There's that connection back to that transcendent experience of seeking something more than yourself is ingrained in dance music. People have called the practice of going out dancing church for a long time. And so it's got the dimensions of the need for connection, but the dimension of sort of a spiritual desire to reach beyond yourself that are both inherent in the culture, for sure. So it's why we do it.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe in it as something that is good in the world. And I think when we marry that with the intentionality about it being a club for New York at this moment in time, that is intentional about the way it engages with its community and reflects its community back into its staffing and its DJ booth and its dance floor, and then provides a place for connection and transformation and unity at a time where we're pretty fractured as a society, then I view it as an important place. I've said this to I'll say this to anybody that listens to me, frankly. I think we need more of these places, not just dance music clubs, but we need more formal places of community, because it's harder and harder to access. It feels like the barriers to accessing community and connection are sort of overwhelming at times. So we just need more of it.
I'd love to close on two different subjects, and it's just about music in general. And I'd love for somebody who might be listening this deep into the conversation, who's interested in learning more about New York DJs, who you love, who you highly, highly recommend people check out live. I'm sure you know dozens of these people, but even if just off the top of your head, I'd love to know who you think the top DJs are that, I'm sure some of them are residents at your club, but who comes to mind as people that others might look up that might go see live?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. I mean, the first one comes to mind is a resident of nowadays. She's called Aurora Halal, and she has been a resident since the very beginning. She also is a very established touring DJ around the world. So she's constantly on the road. She also is the producer of a wonderful festival in upstate New York called Sustain Release that happens every September. She plays techno, essentially, but of a very kind of like groovy and sort of psychedelic form.
Yeah.
On a good sound system with a good crowd, it's got the potential to really take you outside of your head, and she's a real master of it. So I'd highly recommend her. Another DJ that comes to mind is Ron Like Hell. So Ron is nice pun there. Ron's a good friend, and he's been in and around New York DJing and working in record stores for like 30 years. He is part of a crew called Wrecked that do their parties at Basement in Knockdown Center. And Ron is probably one of the most versatile DJs in New York today. He played with me in Mr. Sunday last year and played like a super like disco, like low tempo, like outdoorsy fun vibe. And then you can go and see him at Basement, and he's like pummeling you with like hard techno, and he's got all the range in between and knows when to play it. So anytime Ron is playing, you're in for a good time. Who else have we got? There's another great nowadays resident, going back to nowadays, called Aisha. Aisha plays more kind of bass music that's got much more emphasis in the lower frequency sounds, but not necessarily with like a kick drum, but like bass tones, like bass lines, and a lot of like rolling rhythms. So it's a lot of very sort of percussive music, which can be great for like just really opening up the body, and sort of loosening you up. So it's a little bit more body centric music than the headspace. So she's awesome. Danny Crivet is so Danny has been DJing probably coming up for 50 years. Wow. I think Danny's in his late 60s at this point. Danny DJ'd at the Paradise Garage back in the day. He is part of the Body and Soul party, which only happens, I think, a couple of times a year now. But Danny's got his own party called 718 Sessions, which moves around a lot. Sometimes it's at Good Room. Sometimes it's at Knockdown Center. It does Manhattan sometimes. That is like, if there's any party that embodies the New York of old today, that it's Danny's party. Like, you will go there and you will see a lot of older people north of 60, like getting down hard. But he's also garnered a new audience that sit alongside that. So it's just a really wonderful mix of like, it really feels like New York, like, sort of generationally. And Danny's just a master. Plays a lot of like funk, soul, and disco. So it's very joyful. But he just like knits it all together in a really, really amazing way. And he's just a real gent. So a lot of respect for Danny. And then the last one I would just throw, I mentioned him before, but I just got to mention, because anytime I talk about the art of DJing, to me, he just epitomizes the best of it, is Theo Parrish from Detroit. And Theo plays it nowadays probably like 5 times a year. And if anybody can convince the lay person that DJing is art, it's Theo Parrish. Like, just just Google Theo Parrish, like, or go on to YouTube and just type in Theo Parrish and just watch him DJing. Usually all vinyl, mixing seamlessly, so lost in the music, the ability to like really move a dance floor and create something special on the dance floor in a way that only he can do with records that any other DJ, the same records, wouldn't be able to do it. Like the way he uses the mixer and stuff is just, it's just amazing. I'm not really doing it justice in words, but that's because it's not really something that can be put into words. You have to really experience it. And when he does it nowadays, it's incredible because he really knows how to work that sound system. So as a DJ myself, I really aspire so much to achieve, something vaguely resembling what Theo does. So if you get an opportunity to check him out, definitely go for it.
I definitely will. And I don't know if you have like a Mount Rushmore of historic DJs, people that, and maybe some of these people are working at your club currently, but the people that, and this is really for people that come across this that are just listening, are looking for incredible music to listen to, and they don't know what you know. Where might you point people? Who's worth really delving into that you still look at in awe, or music DJs that really just move the hell out of you?
Well, Theo, right? So if it's the Mount Rushmore, it's Theo Parrish for sure. I mean, the music of Detroit is very important to me, and a lot of my heroes come from Detroit. A lot of these DJs sort of are older now, and they come up through a time when like dance music was very male dominated. So the Mount Rushmore would skew more male than it should do, really, because there's a lot of phenomenal female talent today. So I would start with Theo. I would put Jeff Mills in there as well, who's one of the forefathers of techno that came out of Detroit also. There are some phenomenal videos of Jeff Mills DJing with drum machines on YouTube that you should check out. We have yet to convince Jeff Mills to play it nowadays, so that remains a dream. My time in London was really informed by one DJ and a DJ duo. One was called Andrew Weatherall, who passed away a few years ago. Andrew Weatherall sort of transcended musical styles and did a lot of production work for people like Primal Scream, and existed in the sort of indie rock world as well. But he was a real artist, phenomenal DJ. Then the DJs that really inspired me to start DJing is a duo from Scotland called Optimo, who come to New York pretty regularly. I think they're playing it nowadays later this year. And have become good friends over the years. And they are the masters of really recontextualizing music that you would not expect to hear on a dance floor, but doing it in a way that really works, which is no mean feat. And then I can't remember how many heads are on Mount Rushmore, but I'll throw one last in because I'm a big fan of hers, and have been for a while. And she's called Avalon Emerson. I actually think she's playing Knockdown Center tomorrow.
Wow.
And she's just a wonderful person, amazing DJ, amazing musician, very adventurous, and has been able, she's played a bunch of times at Nowadays. I've heard her a few other places as well, and she's just got this knack for, again, I think the best DJs are the DJs that can create emotional moments and emotional tones that feel different on a dance floor and kind of move you in a different way. And they do that by just the way they bring together pieces of music. And she has done that for me in a way that's felt fresh in the last few years. And I've heard a lot of DJs over the years, so I really appreciate her, like new, she's kind of like a new abstract artist that comes along that throws paint up on the canvas in a slightly different way. That's just like not Jackson Pollock or Rothko. It's like, oh, feels fresh and different, and she's a real master of that. So yeah, she goes up there as well.
Amazing. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question as well, which is what have you learned just as a business owner about the practicalities of making a venue like yours actually work? Right there's the artistic dream. Then there's the day in and day out financial reality of making a system like this actually function in a sustainable way. That's a whole other show I'm sure we could do. But just from a high level, for people that may listen to this who you'll never meet, but want to learn the wisdom you've gained and knowledge you have about how to run a successful nightclub, what are the big takeaways from your career that you would convey to a friend or somebody who's coming to you for advice?
I'd probably tell them not to do it. Get a real job. You got to be disciplined. I spend more time than I would like looking at spreadsheets.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Like we are disciplined on how we staff. We're disciplined on. We work hard on getting good deals and where we order our alcohol from. We work hard on our pricing strategy, on our marketing strategy. It's a business of a small margin, and you got to be very vigilant of that, and really manage your vulnerabilities with respect to expenses, and work hard to continue to be creative and offer something that's interesting and exciting to the city, because there's a lot of options here.
Yeah.
And we I've talked pretty much this entire conversation about the side of like making good culture. So that's the sort of like creating the demand side of it. On the other side is just like, it's very easy to spend a lot of money very quickly. It's very easy to sit in a staff meeting and go, what about this? Let's do this. And before you know it, you've just blown your entire, revenue. You've got to be just really understand that really intimately and be vigilant around that. And explain that to your staff, right? And make sure that they understand that you're not doing this because you're trying to get rich quick. You're doing it because you're trying to protect the thing that we're all a part of. And that's a constant dialogue, because nobody really comes to work for a nightclub to get rich. We're all in it for bigger reasons than a paycheck. So I feel like our operation's pretty mature at this point. Like day to day, I don't get too involved in a lot of decision making. But that's the thing that I am very vigilant on, is like constantly assessing our stability, where we're going, having like a 12-month view of marketing, booking, expenses, seeing surprises come down the line, hopefully before they actually hit you. And that's the thing I think that has sustained us through a few, bumps in the road along the way.
Does New York still have the beauty and the diversity that brought you here in the first place?
I think so, but it's interesting because I've been here so long now. I asked myself that question. I'm like, I'm so in it that I can't. The sense of perspective is warped. I must say that I do love going back to Ireland now. Like, not being able to travel during COVID gave me a homesickness that I hadn't had in a long time. And so I find myself reconnecting to Ireland. And Ireland's a place that's gone through a lot of cultural change in a short amount of time. And I'm really fascinated and interested in that. And I enjoy going back and connecting to that. And but I still love New York, and now I've got both. I can go back there and take my kids there. They've got their Irish passports. They're being indoctrinated into the motherland, and it's all great. Yeah.
This is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.